Hi guys and welcome back to Rage Gaming. Last week in prep for the currently missing in action beta, I took a look at all of the 15 classes we can choose between for that Western launch of Lost Ark. Quite the roster, each class having its own unique playstyle and theme. We worked out what I'm very likely to play is an assassin, but which type, I still don't know. The video should serve as a great way to help you decide on which class you might want to try, but one important question that came up a lot in the comments are, what about the other classes of the game? The 6 other classes of Lost Ark that currently exist and are playable in the Korean version of the game but won't be in the West version. What are those classes? What do they do? And why aren't we able to play them at the Western launch? Well, first up, why don't we have all the new classes in our version? Unfortunately, we don't have a concrete answer from the devs on this yet, but there are a few reasonable assumptions you can make. Maybe they just want a few classes to add to the game as part of future updates to maintain interest and hype. Or more likely, it could just be a localization issue. They've explained that it's been a huge effort already just to translate the game in the first place. They've said that there's been over 3 million words and over 16,000 voice lines from the over 1,500 NPCs to actually translate. So it's been a huge undertaking. Either way, they have stated that alongside the new class releases, there'll be updates like continents, dungeons, and more for the game after it launches initially. So hopefully we don't have long to wait for the new classes. But what are the 6 classes that we're missing and what do they do? Well, before we can actually jump into that, I need to say a couple things that were coming up in the comments confusing people. The Western version of the classes have been renamed in many cases compared to their original Korean names. For example, the Warlord is now called the Gunlancer in our version. They're not different classes, they don't have way more than us, it's just been renamed, and actually it more accurately describes the class this way, but I can see how it led to confusion. Alright, so with that in mind, we have at least one new class for every archetype to talk about. In fact, the mages get 2. So let's begin with the newest class in the game in general, just hitting the Korean servers, and it's a new mage, the Sorceress. This is that dedicated, real mage that I'm hoping for. We have 3 types of magic to draw from with this lady: fire, frost, and lightning, and they all do something different. So there's a main set of abilities that you can then adapt into one of the different elements. Fire having burns to deal damage over time, frost being able to freeze and slow enemies, and lightning being a bursty damage while also having the chance to paralyze. A main component of the Sorceress though is the casting of your spells. Many spells are going to need to be channeled before they go off, but because of that, they're going to have a powerful effect. Sure, we do have lots of instant cast spells to control and manage the enemy, which is probably a good idea to do before you do one of those bigger casts. You might also notice in some gameplay that the magic gauge is filling as she's fighting. That's a power bar that you fill through combat and then you'll spend in various ways. We see an example of long range movement where she uses lightning to zip around long distances. Instead of that, you can spend your gauge on direct combat perks. For this, you need at least 30% of your gauge, but at 100%, the effect will be even stronger. You'll enter a buffed state. And during that, you have raw damage increases, extremely fast cast speed, which is really important, fire and lightning staggers and breaks enemies even faster, and most of your skills have a way shorter cooldown. Basically, it's your super power mode, and you want to choose how to spend it, making you a versatile powerhouse. So overall, we have an extremely versatile class in the Sorceress, with incredible AoE damage potential in PvE, and top tier control abilities in PvP. A classic mage done pretty well, swapping between elements based on what you need, spending power the best way you can think of, allowing for big brain gameplay. Moving on then to our new gunner class, the absolutely incredible looking Scouter. This futuristic shooter uses a literal mech suit to fight. This one is going to require a lot of input as a class. This is because you have to micromanage your drone while also controlling your own character, who is going to be fighting at fast pace himself. So we've got a guy equipped with a submachine gun, future tech, and lots of utility, and then when you're juiced up, you can put on your power suit and just go to town. This future soldier will generally fight at close to medium range, and is of course joined by that drone, which you can make use of in lots of ways. Now, as I said, this is a high input class, and part of that is coming because of the drone. You can micro it by moving it around and giving it commands, having it use abilities and attacks that you carefully position, while at the same time, of course, you are fighting yourself. So just that is going to be a bit to think about. The drone can attack with straight damage, CC enemies, or protect you depending on what you need in the moment. Your normal gameplay sees you shooting and spreading machine gun fire through enemies while managing your drone, and at times you'll combine with your drone to enhance your output, like firing a laser cannon that you need to channel, or doubling up to unload a mag together. Control-wise, you control your character, swap to your drone, swap to your character, swap to your drone, and combine in a flow that seems pretty rewarding. But then when you're full power, you enter your power suit, and everything's just enhanced. New abilities while moving at like hyper speed, your jets are allowing you now to zip around the battle and get up close. Unleashing laser shots that you fire from your hands, like Iron Man, spinning, cleaving beams, or even pulling out multiple drones to burn your enemies down. Mechanically, I think the Scouter is incredible, and one that I will absolutely be trying when it comes to the West. Next up though, we have another strong contender for me and my interests, the third assassin class, the Reaper. The Reaper will use a dagger and also a free hand that's going to use magic. This, unlike the other two assassins in Lost Ark, actually feels like an assassin because it uses stealth and surprise attacks to defeat their enemies. With that, she is a very squishy class, so does rely on her wide array of utility and tricks to survive. Kind of like the Sorceress, the abilities fall under 3 types: dagger attacks, poisons, and the very cool shadow skills. Your dagger attacks are of course direct damage, while poison will deal damage over time naturally. The shadow skills are those magical abilities, allowing you to trick and evade the enemy with stealth and illusions. These illusions can draw the attention of the enemy, exposing their back to the real you, or have you attack in unison to just overwhelm. Also like the Sorceress, she has a gauge to build up and spend, but in this case we have 2, the Dark Gauge and the Chaos Gauge. The Dark Gauge is spent to enter the persona state, disappearing from sight and then tricking your enemy by summoning illusions, while the Chaos Gauge is damage based, entering a state that increases your attack speed and movement speed massively. Very importantly, the Reaper will always want to be behind the enemy from maximum damage through back attacks. You'll strike through enemies, you'll dash multiple times, you'll teleport directly behind your target. Funnily though, from the reviews and details I've read about this class, it is a little bit too strong and they're having issues balancing her because she's a bit too good. So I wonder if we're going to see those fixes in our version when we get her. But anyway, our 4th class coming to the game in the future is the 5th of the fighter archetype, the Lance Master. So using their lance, I know, big shock, they fight at super fast speed to combo and cleave their enemies. It has 2 types of attacks depending on which stance you're in. Your blue stance attacks are sweeping and cleaving, while the red stance attacks are more focused and piercing. So you'll choose the right type of attack to fight whatever enemy you're fighting, whether it's a group of enemies or one big one. But you actually won't be swapping stances blindly with this class. That's because of the gauge system. By fighting in one stance, you will gradually build your gauge, and that has 3 stages. When you build a gauge or multiple and then swap stance, it kind of locks in the power you've built up and then buffs you. At stages 1 and 2, you increase your speed massively, while at full gauge or stage 3, you increase your raw damage as well, your crit damage, and you get the biggest speed reward possible. So you want to fight enemies in one stance, ideally the correct one, and then lock in your max built up power to devastate the foe in the other stance. And then when you're in that new buffed up stance, you continue to fight and build up your gauge as fast as possible to swap stance once again before you drop your buff, so permanently fighting in your enhanced state always in an ideal world. It's simple in concept and should be a pretty good class for a beginner because of that. Now then, for our 5th and 6th classes coming to the game, these are 2 classes that are actually old rather than new. Originally in the game at the Korean launch, the Destroyer and Arcana are not technically new. For us though, these will be really important since we have, say, a more independent mage that otherwise we won't have at launch, and also the first hammer user of the warrior archetype. Starting with the Destroyer then. Our unit of a man here uses a huge hammer to crush his foes. Just like the Berserker, it's slow and heavy movement, but huge damage output thanks to those big crushing abilities and attacks. It's a durable class thanks to the heavy armor at the cost of speed, and will pack a serious punch when you land your hits with those huge numbers for slams and charge attacks. Unlike most classes, the Destroyer is happy right in front of the enemy, gaining bonus damage in fact when the enemy's facing him. The hammer is actually known as the Gravity Hammer because it allows you to control gravity in various ways. You can buff yourself up or slow and hold down enemies at range, basically giving them no escape. Most of his slow moving hits will stagger or even stun an enemy to further control them, which is good because some of your attacks are going to be charged up during those moments to unleash a bigger hit. So with multi-hit bonk combos and the effects of the hammer to pull enemies in, this is a man you want at the front, crushing the enemy. Simple and straightforward, and another class that should be good for a beginner. However, it is apparently a bit punishing if you are poor with your attack placement and timing. Since they're slow attacks, and with longer cooldowns compared to other classes, you do not want to miss these. But finally, our last class to come to the West after the initial release is the second mage archetype still to come, the ARCANA, aka the Tarot Card Reader. Yes, this is the mage who summons giant cards and attacks their enemies with them. As silly as that concept is, this is an apparently incredible DPS class, but because of the cards, does somewhat rely on luck and also the clever gameplay from the player. Many of her abilities apply stacks to enemies, which you can see as cards above their heads, and then you can consume those stacks with other abilities to deal extra damage. Around that, we have a few utility abilities that ignore the stack system, so you're not stuck with that always. But where this class is a bit complex and most interesting though, is the gauge that fills up and generates your cards. Random cards. We have 2 slots for these randomly pulled cards, so you'll pull 2 cards from a possible 12. These cards will provide different things. Buffs like raw damage and movement speed and crit damage and triple attack or pull an extra card or other interesting effects. However, some cards have a good or bad result, so you might pull it and gain damage, or you might end up with decreased damage for a brief moment, not only wasting the potential of that card, but also making you slower or weaker for a bit. So that's why I say this class has a bit of luck involved. I do think it's pretty cool though, and kind of reminds me of Legion Outlaw Rogue if you played that. Basically, you have a chance to be stupid strong or get depression. So how good is your luck? This is the class to find out. But there you have it, the 6 classes to come to our Western launch sometime in the future. Hopefully we aren't waiting long for these, especially one of the 2 mages, just to give us that direct DPS option for that archetype. But I'm wondering if any of these are ones that you'd main for sure if they were there at launch. I know that I really want to try the Reaper and Scouter at the very least, but either way, I've been Hollow, you've been you. Thanks for watching.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.